Can you hear me now? Hi. Welcome, everybody, to the 27th Annual Texas Book Festival. If you're here for Sarah Bird, you are in the right place. Please silence your cell phones. If you must eat hard candy, open that sucker right now. Feel free to share your experience on social media. You can tag the festival and use the hashtag Texas Book Fest, @TexasBookFest, or hashtag TXBookFest. After this conversation, Sarah will be signing books at the book signing tents on Congress Avenue. And what else do you need to know? Books are for sale in the tent next to that. They are being provided by book people, and by buying books at the festival, you're supporting the festival's mission of helping get books in the hands of low-income kids at school, and also grants for libraries in Texas, who God knows need it right now. Okay. Sarah Bird is called the finest living Texas writer by Texas Observer magazine. She is a best-selling novelist, screenwriter, essayist, and journalist. She has published 11 novels and 3 books of essays. Sarah has been an NPR Moth Radio Hour storyteller, a 9-time winner of the Austin Best Fiction Award, a finalist for the Dublin International Literary Award. We're not even halfway through, y'all. An Alex Award winner, Amazon Literature Best of the Year selection, Barnes & Noble Discover Great Writers selection, New York Public Library's Books to Remember, and an honoree of the Texas Writers Hall of Fame. She has written for O Magazine, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Texas Observer, Texas Highways, Slate, and Salon, among others, and was the back page columnist for Texas Monthly for 6 years. A 10-year career as a screenwriter, when she wrote for such companies as Warner Brothers and Paramount, led to her selection for the Meryl Streep Screenwriters Lab. I believe the inaugural one, yeah? Sarah co-founded the Writers League of Texas, is the 2021 winner of the University of New Mexico's Paul Ray Award for Cultural Advocacy, and is the hologram greeter at the Austin Central Library, if you've been there. It is my huge honor to introduce the First Lady of Literature, my dear friend, the marvelous Sarah Bird.
Tiffany Yates Martin, this could be the height of my career, to be introduced by a Broadway actress, best-selling author, editor of best-selling authors, and much in-demand speaker around the country. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Tiffany. Yes, indeed. This is my 11th novel. That's a lot of typing. Some might say too much typing. Do you know what? Could you get me my reading glasses, George? I can see you all, but now I can't see what I'm reading here. Hello, I'm 72. Grazie, grazie. I'm really excited about doing this. I love showing the images that inspired this book, and I whether you've read it, whether you haven't read it, if you haven't read the book, it provides a great basis for looking at, reading. And what I really, really like about these images is that so many people don't believe that this is true. And it's just great to have these pictures in your head I think it makes the novel a richer experience, certainly more believable. So after I'm done, I don't have a moderator, and so I'm just going to take questions. So be thinking of questions as I do my little show and tell. Sound good? All right, then. Join me on a trip back in time, back to that grim, that glorious, that turning point period in American history, the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the dance marathons that those desperate years spawned. But let's start with my initial inspiration, the spark that ignited my interest in dance marathons, and that would be my mother. Yes, that is my mother there in the middle, Callista Marie McCabe, and here she is with her graduating class at Battleground High School in Indiana, portraying the Statue of Liberty. I asked her once, I said, did they pick you because you're so pretty? She says, hell no, it's because I'm so damn tall. Anyway, this photo was taken at the height of the Great Depression, just a few months after her father, a farmer on a struggling farm in Indiana, died of a massive heart attack, leaving behind a wife and 4 children. And there she is, cover girl of, yes, get ready for it, the Hoosier Farmer. Collie Mack, as we, her 6 sassy children, like to call her, taught us by example that there is indeed fun and laughter to be had in even the hardest of hard times, if you can find a way to come together and share your troubles. Why, if you got a sheet and some tinfoil, you can even be the Statue of Liberty. Anyway, I heard the echoes of those hard-won laughs and happy times in the stories she told of the time that her isolated rural community sponsored a dance marathon at the local Grange Hall. In her recollection, that dance marathon had been a jolly community gathering, sort of like a cross between a church supper and a slumber party, where for just a nickel, she and her pals could stay as long as they wanted. They could come and cheer on the local contestants, get crushes on the cute boys from out of town. They could even stay up all night and watch the amazing sight of competitors who not only slept on their feet like horses, but kept moving the entire time. That rosy vision was at considerable odds with the unrelievedly grim version of dance marathons that I encountered in the 1969 movie. Name that movie. Okay, a prize for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Yeah. For years, decades, the suspicion nagged at me that this film, as fine a piece of cinema as it is, somehow left some big parts out. Very early on in my research, I learned that the movie was based on a novel written by an author who had set out specifically to write the first American existential novel. So, yeah, you know, Camus, Sartre, that whole laugh-a-minute gang. So the novel was going to be grim. And the more certain I learned that, you know, mostly what Hollywood had left out of this movie about the dance marathons of the Great Depression was, in fact, the Great Depression. That absence skewed the public perception of these contests because it is impossible to understand the marathons and their popularity without appreciating how truly dire the times were. In 1933, the worst year of the worst economic disaster in not just American history, but in the history of the industrialized world, 1/4 of the nation's workers had lost their jobs. Those lucky enough to still be employed saw their salaries cut almost in half. Dust storms that turned the day to night were burying the Great Plains from Canada to Texas. Faced with this disaster, families split up or migrated from their homes in search of work. Some families simply couldn't afford to feed all their children and had to put the older ones out to make their way as best they could. Like these 2 teenagers seen here hopping a train. This, then, was the world that gave birth to the true dance marathons. The key element in their creation was time. In the novel, my protagonist, Evie Grace Devlin, a former vaudeville child star who turns to the marathons to survive, observes that the Depression took away jobs and money. Too often, it also took away drive and hope, and all it gave back was time. Oceans and oceans of endless time. Time enough to care about a bunch of strangers who could almost feel like a family if you watched them orbit a dance floor long enough. Given that these shows have virtually disappeared from our collective memory, I was astonished to discover just how wildly popular they once had been. At their height, from roughly 1930 to 1934, Countless small towns, as well as every city in the country with a population of 50,000 or more, hosted at least one show in venues that range from, say, a Grange Hall in Indiana, to auditoriums, coliseums, immense dance halls like the Roseland, and even arenas such as Madison Square Garden, where over 5,000 spectators bought tickets for a show there. In the peak years, marathons employed approximately 20,000 promoters, MC, judges, trainers, nurses, contestants, and quote-unquote sloppers who kept everyone fed. By way of comparison, the worldwide wrestling enterprise currently has fewer than 1,000 employees around the globe. They even, occasionally, brought in manicurists and beauticians. Even more amazing, though, than how popular the shows were was how long they lasted. The couple that ultimately won the competition pictured here danced an astonishing 3,780 hours. Allow me to do that math for you. That is more than 5 months. This happened. And sleep, you might ask, what about sleep? Well, every hour the contestants got a 10 to 15-minute break. During that time, nurses and trainers attended to their aches and pains, their bunions and corns. There might be time for a quick shower. The lucky ones grabbed a few winks. Because when the contestants were on the floor, they had to remain in constant motion, whether they were eating at chest-high tables, attempting to shave, or, here's the key factor, sleeping. Since the only real sleeping was done on the floor during the wee hours when the lights were low and the crowds were thin, that is how they learned to sleep. Research for this novel was studded with great discoveries, but the one that practically made me shriek with joy was when I came across this photo. This photo accompanied an article reporting on the, quote, colossal success of the opening night of a dance marathon that had attracted, quote, 2,000 spectators who had crowded into the city auditorium despite the heavy rains. What made me so ecstatic about this marathon, which opened on September 12, 1932, is that it was held in Galveston, Texas. This discovery was such a thrill because Galveston, Texas in the 30s is a complete and utter gift to a novelist. I mean, look at it. We had our very own boardwalk empire down here in Texas, except that the weather was better and the people were nicer. Galveston back then was possessed of a dark glamour that had been created and was carefully cultivated by a pair of barber brothers, Sam and Rosario Maceo, who had immigrated from, yes, Sicily. And here we see Sam and Rose just chilling with their paisan, Frank Sinatra. The Maceo brothers transformed the city on a sandbar into an international destination for world-class entertainment that was so successful it remained virtually immune to both the dry days of Prohibition and the economic ravages of the Great Depression, and provided the model for Las Vegas. As I had Evie Grace observe in the novel, Galveston was a wide-open town where Prohibition was a suggestion instead of the law of the land, where gambling wasn't considered any worse than chewing tobacco, and there were more prostitutes than spotted dogs. Most important, everyone knew that the only rules that applied in Galveston were the ones enforced by the family that ran the whole glorious empire of vice. The Maceos specialized in swank, high-dollar gambling, top-shelf booze, and world-class entertainers. Duke Ellington, Phil Harris, Jimmy Dorsey, Peggy Lee, the Maceos booked them all into their ritzy clubs. Though the Balinese Room, seen here, became the most famous of their locations, it wasn't built until after the Great Depression. The club that I featured in the novel's final scene was Galveston's first big-time night spot, the Hollywood Dinner Club, which opened in 1926. The casino was decorated like something out of Scheherazade. It seated 500 diners and was the first in the country to be air-conditioned. Thanks to the Macios, seen here with their pals, the sheriff and a constable, and their cozy relationships with law enforcement, Galveston had an abundance of glamorous, novel-ready settings. The one I chose for the setting of the novel's climactic dance marathon was the Pleasure Pier, which, in a definite instance of gilding the lily, I renamed the Starlight Pier. Galveston in the 30s. I loved visiting it, I loved researching it, and I loved recreating its wonders for my characters to inhabit. Really, just briefly now, I'd like to mention another research find that thrilled me. This was the discovery of an exceedingly vibrant gay underground in Chicago in the 20s and 30s that pivoted around what were called pansy clubs. These clubs were as bawdy, joyous, and performative as they were clandestine and exclusive. As an astonished Evie Grace observes on her first visit, "As I beheld the scene, I felt like Alice after she'd gone through the looking glass. As dreary and unpromising the outside of the club had been, the inside was just that alluring and glamorous. Deeply shadowed scenes of impossible elegance swam out of the pools of candlelight, illuminating the room. Feathers and fur with nothing but creamy shoulders and swan necks emerged from the darkness." Probably, however, my most useful research find was a memoir by the actress June Havoc, who wrote a first-person account of her years on the dance marathon circuit. This was extremely valuable to me because there is shockingly little documentation about this uniquely American phenomenon. June Havoc was the daughter of a stage mother so notorious that the Broadway hit Gypsy was based on her. June's sister was the infamous burlesque dancer, Gypsy Rose Lee. You got it. Practically as soon as baby June could walk, their mother had the toddler toe dancing across vaudeville stages under the stage name, the Pint-Sized Pavlova. Oh yes, I had to steal that. By the time June was 14, however, both vaudeville and her career were over. When June's mother saw her dreams of vicarious stardom dashed, she turned her 14-year-old daughter out to survive on her own. Like most contestants, June began entering marathons so that she'd have a roof over her head and plentiful food, since competitors were fed a dozen times a day. Contestants were also lured by the possibility of winning cash prizes that ranged from a few hundred to $1,000. Many sought stardom. A few, like June, the comic Red Skelton, and the jazz singer Anita O'Day, even found it. Using memoirs such as June Havoc's, newspaper and journal articles, dissertations, letters, photo and radio archives, even cookbooks, movie fan magazines, and, most gloriously of all, the Cherry Ames student nurse books, I began to recreate the anthropology of the lost world of the dance marathons. I was fascinated by how marathon promoters had paved the way for everything from professional wrestling to reality television shows like The Bachelor, by cooking up rivalries and romances between the contestants, by creating heroes for audiences to cheer and villains for them to boo. And then there were these special events that promoters staged to boost attendance. Whoa, I skipped a, sorry, you should have been looking at that. Here's the special event. They would freeze favorite contestants alive, literally encasing them in huge blocks of ice until many were, in fact, near death. They would take away rest periods and conduct sudden eliminations called grinds, in which contestants had to sprint around the floor or drag iron balls shackled to their ankles or dance in crazy patterns. There were also wildly popular grocery nights, where huge crowds would thrill to the simple sight of seeing lucky winners take home baskets of food. And cot nights, when audience thrilled to the even simpler sight of watching contestants sleep. You have to remember, entertainment was pretty scarce on the ground back then. Many people literally did not even have radios, so try to put yourself in that mindset. Since the marriage rate during the Depression was down by a third because couples couldn't afford to start their lives together, fancy weddings of any sort were a huge attraction. But a cellophane wedding, where the bride and all her many bridesmaids wore gowns made of transparent cellophane over their underwear, well, that was a guaranteed sold-out house. The cellophane wedding was another one of the fabulous research discoveries that ended up becoming a pivotal element in the novel. But the main event of all the shows was simply watching how long the contestants could endure and waiting for those dramatic moments when someone would drop from exhaustion. As thrilling as the eliminations were, however, there absolutely had to be winners. There had to be two ordinary people who were not too different from themselves that an audience could cheer for. The point of the competition was spectators seeing fighters who struggled against the odd just like they were struggling. Those desperate audiences needed the reassurance of seeing a gutsy couple who endured it all and who managed to triumph over the sheer, endless grind. They needed that little spark of hope it gave them, that they too were going to not just endure the sheer, endless grind of a depression that lasted 10 years, but maybe even come out winners themselves in the end. I'm so grateful to my mom for sparking my interest in dance marathons. It was a strange sort of gift from her. Hang on. Let's go back to my mom. Let's go back. It was a strange sort of gift from her that I was working on this novel during the early days of the pandemic, when we were all locked down and sanitizing our groceries and uncertain about just how bad things were going to get or how long it all was going to last. Though I by no means want to equate my hardship of having to quit my Pilates class with the deprivation that my mother's generation endured, I did find it inspiring to explore a world animated by the resilience of the American spirit. A world where if we could come together and share our troubles, a bit of fun, a few laughs, or at least some much-needed distraction could be had in even the hardest of hard times. Thank you all very much. And now I pray to God someone has a question. Oh, why, looky here. It's Kathleen Sutherland. Why, Kathleen? Thank you. Miss Sutherland.
As you were saying all this, I realized, like, would we ever do this again? Like, but then we have Survivor. There's some, ocean, human rights issues going on and all this. But my question is actually not could we survive a dance marathon, but the Great Depression and everything that came along with it. My grandparents were in that era, and that's when I got married. My mom grew up with that mentality and everything, and my grandma was a real get-it-done kind of person. Like, you just did it,
Yeah.
and all that. But do you think, what would happen if we actually got back to the level of the Great Depression now? How would Americans, we as Americans, how do you feel like we would respond?
I've thought about that quite a bit, as we are coming into probably not so great economic times. And it's just, you have to remember, the Great Depression occurred in a mostly rural world. America at that time was mostly rural. America at this time is mostly urban. That's a huge, huge difference. And, you know, as in everything, our media, communications, has just changed the landscape so dramatically. I mean, you're talking about the Great Depression. This was a time when there was a common trough, when there were sources of news that everybody believed in and trusted. I was thinking about this during when, you know, this miraculous thing happened and America, in rocket speed, developed a vaccine for this deadly virus, right? Which seems like, oh, you know, it'll be a polio scenario. Well, it wasn't, correct? And because of the disinformation that came out. And this made me think about FDR was elected and he came into office during, you know, the worst of the Great Depression. And at that point, the point at which FDR came into office, our banking system was failing because so many people had withdrawn their money. In his first fireside chat, FDR got on the radio and talked to people and explained why they needed to take their money out from underneath the mattress, from wherever they were hiding it, and put it back into the banking system. The next day, there were lines around the block with people clutching big jars of pennies and, you know, their wallets folded. And that's what saved the banking system. Now, I mean, specifically, would that happen today? I don't think it would. You know, if a sort of appeal like that went out, there would be massive conspiracy theories and lots of ideas about how the banking system is being manipulated by somebody or other. So I don't know. And you know, the other thing that I point out is these events happened in an entertainment wasteland. You know, where people did have time. They were out. Everybody was out of work. You know, you could spend the entire day watching people orbit a dance floor. So, yeah, a lot of factors in that. Questions? Hello.
Hey, would you share a Maceo Brothers story or two with us?
Oh, so you yes. Here's the painting, and it's really it's quite striking to go into the Blanton and stand in front of. I mean, it certainly was for me. I derived a great deal of inspiration from this. I probably disagree with what the artist is portraying here at the level of exploitation that I think he's trying to get across. You know, I think we can see that with that jeweled hand reaching up, right, and then the skeletal hand coming down. So that it implies, and that's one of the big reasons that dance marathons have dropped from our consciousness, is because they were pretty much tarred with this brush of exploitation. But once again, I say you have to put it in context of the times. The Maceo brothers, oh my God, anybody here from Galveston? Grew up in Galveston? Hey! Anybody BOI? Hey, tell them what that means.
It's born on the island, and if you arrived on the island later, you become an IBC, which means Islander by choice.
I'd never heard that. I knew about BOI, but I love that. You know, Galveston just has the most amazing history. Here is this tiny little island that was wiped out in 1900 in the greatest natural disaster to date that America has ever seen, built on a sandbar, right? And the inhabitants come back and go, oh, well, okay, our little town on Sandbar has been wiped out. What should we do? Possibly go inland and build on stone? Or like, no, let's build it. Let's raise the town 13 feet and build it back right here. So it's kind of crazy, wonderful. In my book, I called the Maceos the Amadeo, because I didn't want to hew exactly to the Maceo story. I also didn't want to write a gangster novel. But they were fabulous. This pair of brothers from Sicily, they arrived in this country around the turn of the century and were barbers. They ended up in Galveston cutting hair for like 10 cents or a quarter a head. And at this time, this was Prohibition, and there was a very lively gang scene going on. A lot of gangs running liquor in because they would have these cutters, very, very fast boats, much faster than the Coast Guard had, bringing in shipments of bonded Canadian whiskey and aged Cuban rum, like, you know, not swill, but really good, expensive stuff. and they would bring them into Galveston. And so they were getting in a big shipment, and there was a little bit of heat, so they asked the Maceo brothers, these inconspicuous barbers, not great English, if they would hide the shipment in their barber shop, where the last place the police would look. They agreed, sure, let's do that. And then, everything went fine, the police left, the gang leader came to pay him up, and the Maceo brothers said, no, how about instead you just cut us in on the business? And that's how they got their start. And I think it's very important that they did come from Sicily, because this is a culture that understands if you take care of the community will take care of you, and that is absolutely what happened in Galveston with the Maceo brothers. And they went on to invent Las Vegas. They seriously did. Galveston was Las Vegas before Las Vegas. Yeah. Oh, we have questions.
I'm Viola. And I grew up hearing stories about my mom and dad dancing at the Hollywood Dinner Club.
Really? That's cool. You're the first person with any connection I've met.
You could hear the roller coaster from our house. And it was, I really appreciate your depiction of the island at that time. I wasn't quite that old, but, I came along.
I wish I spent a lot of time researching there, but I wish I had a time machine to go back then.
According to my mother.
Right.
And she had come from Houston where there really was a depression.
Right. No, once you got outside of Galveston, Houston was not hit certainly as bad as the rest of the country. Cotton and oil were kind of keeping it afloat. Thank you.
Appreciate the history lesson.
Thank you. Hey, hi there.
I'm Kathleen Hudson.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hey, and I had a question about your writing process. The research sounds so fascinating.
I could spend the rest of my life doing that.
And then the fiction was born somewhere, the character, Evie, or the depression. But I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the process.
Yeah, how they melt together. That's a really fine line. It's a danger if you're doing a historical novel to fall in love with your research too much, because, you need to have an essential story that you don't allow the research to deform, which I don't always succeed at. But a lot of the characters and a lot of my inspiration was my mom, and she was a nursing student. Her father, died, and she was adopted by some nuns in their little town, and she had grown up as a Methodist and converted. So we were all raised Catholic, and we were just riveted by her stories of what it was like to go to church as a Methodist. And she said, they'd go, bring lunches and sit in the back pews and read the funny papers. And, meanwhile, we're going in Dominus Vobiscum, and fasting in the days when you had to fast. So, kids were passing out from hunger. I was going, God, the Methodists, that sounds like a lot more fun. But she told these great stories about the nuns who adopted her, got her a scholarship for this Catholic training school, which is where she converted, and it would tell us about, what it's like for a non-Catholic to walk into that world. And I just wanted to, kind of borrow that, which I did for Evie Grace. I borrowed a lot of my mom's story and a lot of June Havoc's stories. So I don't know, it's just a big compost heap up here, and you put stuff in, and you hope it's something fertile will grow. I'm a good liar. What can I tell you? Don't believe a word out of my... Rena Peterson, hello.
Wonderful talk, by the way.
Thank you.
You've had such a wonderful career as a writer. I'm curious about your process, again, to follow up on that question. Do you write longhand and then switch to computer? Do you make an outline? Or do you follow your characters? Do they carry you along?
Yeah, you gotta...
It was going to end when you started?
Did I know how it was going to end? Very rarely have I known how my novels will end, but I kind of know, the note they will end on. Do I want it to be, melancholy, bittersweet? This one I wanted to be joyful, and part of that was I pivoted the novel around the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which was genuinely a joyous moment in our country. He won by a landslide, and so that was wonderful to work in. As far as now, thank God I don't write longhand. I was an early adopter. Fortunately, I worked at that time. I was working at the Texas State Department of Mental Health, Mental Retardation, and I was doing their what they used to call house organ at that time, which is I wrote all the stories for that. And my editor's husband was one of the early founders of Dell, and so I went off and I did a story about romance writing, and I said, wow, I need to write a romance novel. And then I was talking to my editor, and I said, it isn't really my chosen genre. I don't necessarily want to get my Selectric out and do 400 or 500 pages 6 or 7 times. And she said, you need a computer. And this was 1980. To me, a computer, I said, I don't think my garage is large enough. That's not possible. Because it was, the days of the UNIVAC and whatnot. And anyway, she said, go over, talk to Jay. I went over to talk to Jay. In 1980, he loaded up the only beautiful computer ever made, wooden computer, and a daisy wheel printer. It was $3,000. I made $7,000 a year back then. And gave me the WordStar 1 operator's manual. Said, keep it for a week. So I learned, Control, K, B, block save, and it took me a week to learn, and then I just said, I'm never going back. And my hands thank me. Does anybody else have a question? I think we have time for maybe, hello, look who's here. It's my friend. Hi, Susan.
So you've written many books. This one, just another beautiful book of yours. So what would be your favorite? Or do you have?
Yeah, I actually do. You're supposed to say, oh, they're like my children. I can't pick a favorite. But, some are breech birth, and you're a lot of trouble. You maybe more trouble than you're worth. No, my favorite book is Yakota Officers Club because it's very autobiographical. It's very much about my family, and I can open any page of that book and start crying. So that's my favorite. Thank you. Thank you for asking. Oh, hello.
Belinda, question. So I've been really fortunate to have spent time everywhere any of your books have been
Oh, cool.
out of. So what I want to know is where are we going next?
Oh, you are going to Dilley, Texas. No, I'm writing an article for Texas Monthly about, I don't know if any of you have heard about the snow monkeys of Texas. Does anybody know about this? It's just this forgotten, yay, my hero. And it's too long a story to go into now, especially since we're going to be shooed out of here momentarily. But, come and talk to me later. I'll be signing books at the book signing tents. Let me see. Congress on. Pardon? Boy, I wish I knew the answer to that question because my publisher and I would be happy to guide you. Theoretically, that's where I'm heading. So I would love to hear your Galveston stories or anything else you want to talk about. And thank you all very, very much for coming.